was a guy called Julius Africanus. But almost certainly he was not the translator. It was probably done by one of his scribes or something like that. But it was attributed to him. Just as, for example, all the epistles of Paul were never written by Paul. They were simply attributed to him.
Yes.
So, but the important thing that we have there is that the guy who did the translation in the prologue says very clearly that Abdius was related to the Lord. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, he doesn't say how. If he did, it would make my life infinitely easier.
Right.
But the fact that he was related in some way or other means that he would know who Jesus' brothers and sisters are. And from him, we get very clearly that Jesus had a twin brother called Judas, known as Judas Thomas, or later on simply Thomas, which simply means twin, and another full brother called Jacob or James. And it also says quite clearly that, these were produced per carnum, by way of the flesh. In other words, Joseph and Mary had normal sexual intercourse. There was no question of virgin births. And presumably, if Thomas is a twin, then Jesus wasn't by virgin birth either.
Right.
It's a bit difficult. He also, of course, says that Joseph, Jesus' father, had another wife called Hannah, and by her he had Simon, known as Simon Hananias, or Simon the Petron, another Judas, or possibly Judah, who's usually known as Zelotes, and Thaddeus. So there was another 3 half-brothers of Jesus as well. Plus we know from the Gospel of Philip that he had a sister called Mary. So one can build up, if you like, a picture of his family.
Right.
Now the problem that we then have is we have no genealogy from that until the 8 people come to see Pope Sylvester in 318. Okay, so we've gone from, let's say, for the sake of argument, the year 80 AD, right?
Yeah.
To the year 318 AD. But we do know their names, because that's mentioned. That's mentioned by Eusebius. So what I tried to do is to look at what was the likelihood of who was descended from whom. To be perfectly frank, I haven't been terribly successful. I've made some suggestions, but there is simply, that is the most likely, but it's not by any means, I wouldn't put hand on heart and say, well, that's what it is, because you can't do that.
Right.
There are too many gaps missing. But I have done my best and said, well, that's what I think is the likelihood. And then there was another document, which obviously was which I actually don't think it was a different document. I think probably that Dr. Hugh Sinclair found the same documents I have found and worked out his own genealogy from it, which, although similar to mine, does differ. Okay? All I have said is I've given what his genealogy says, I've given what I think it is, and I've suggested where the differences might lie and why they might be different.
Okay.
And I think mostly it's a question of names, and, for example, the name Thomas probably doesn't mean Thomas, it probably means twin, and Germanus probably simply means brother, rather than being a name.
Okay.
And I suspect that that's the sort of differences that we've got.
So it's not too much there, and as you say, this is very much about laying the puzzle, as it were, because a lot of these pieces are lost. Do you think that there are any? I mean, again, when the Nag Hammadi library were, discovered, so to speak, a lot of new information were brought to light. Do you think that we're ever going to see something like that again, where new reliable sources or documentation about this will come to light? What do you think?
I think that there are at least 2 other documents around. I suspect that in order to bring them to light, someone's going to have to pay an awful lot of money for them. A bit like, for example, the Gospel of Judas.
Mm-hmm.
It's been known about for, 40, 50 years? And it was stuck in a safe deposit box for years. It got completely ruined in there simply because someone wouldn't put up whatever it was the asking price was, £1 million or something for it.
Right.
Now, I suspect that there are at least a couple of other documents like that around. But, whether they will ever come to light or not, and if they do come to light, what state they will be in, I've got no idea.
Right. How about the Bible as, I guess, historical document? Are there clues in there as well?
Oh, yes, I think there are. But what one has to appreciate is that the Gospels were rewritten after 325 AD. And I mean, Eusebius actually says, I and my scribes sat down and rewrote them. So you have to read them with a degree of skepticism and see what was possibly in the original and what has been added to or changed. I mean, for example, von Tischendorf, when he was preparing his collection, which is now in the Strathclyde Library, he actually said, he was amazed by the way that the monks had quite, without even thinking about it, decided to change what the original said because it didn't conform to church dogma.
Yeah.
So one has to be very careful about it. But yes, sure, there are clues here and there in these documents. And I mean, for example, the work of Lady Droa on the Mandeans is terribly important because it's the only extant work which gives a different story for John and says that John was considerably older than Jesus and that he was the original founder, if you like, and that Jesus merely took over after John had died.
Tell us a little bit more about the Mandeans. This is something that has come up a little bit now and then recently in the program, and we haven't kind of discussed it that much. What do you know about the Mandeans? And this was, as far as I understand it, pretty much a Gnostic type sect in the region of Iraq today, I guess.
Well,
correct?
Yeah. I mean, they're almost. I'm not sure even how many there are left because they were almost totally wiped out by Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
They were the people of the sort of fens of the little rivers and so on at the southern end of Iraq near the Iran border, and they have their own Bible, their own belief system, and everything else, which they call in order to survive in the Muslim world, they call themselves Johannite Muslims, but strictly, I think they call themselves sort of a sect of Shia or something.
Okay.
But originally they were called Johannite Christians.
From John the Baptist,
Johannite. From John,
yes.
Yeah. And as far as they're concerned, John was the Messiah, and Jesus was a false Messiah, who took over and changed the word of John. And for example, all the story about, the Magnificat.
No.
How does it start? Oh goodness me, I can't remember now.
Okay.
But that wasn't actually said by Mary. It was originally said by Elizabeth about her son John. The Lord doth magnify my name, and so on. My name does magnify the Lord. I beg your pardon. That was actually taken straight out of there and stuck into the Gospels as if it's said by Mary. But in fact, the Church agrees that it was originally said by Elizabeth about her son John.
Okay. That's interesting. And this is the Magnificat. For those who doesn't know this, it's a text of the.
Nowadays it's a sort of thing that the Roman Catholic Church almost sort of a lot of people have to sort of learn it by heart. My soul doth magnify my Lord, and something God my Saviour, who hath something rather his handmaiden, so that all people shall call me blessed. I can't remember. I used to know it by heart, but it's a long time ago.
But there's possible clues here that lies within this then, and this is again